Thank you both for having me. Um, so it's 4:30 in the afternoon where I am, and I know it's really early for all of you, like nine. For a lot of you in the US, it's around 9:30 in the morning. So I'm really excited to be able to chat with you all today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about memories and the way that memories can empower and build empathy. And we're talking about across generations and cultures. So this session is going to be interactive. We're going to be building an actual little like memory book together by answering a few questions. And we'll also have a conversation. So it's a safe space. I want everyone to know that, I completely understand that delving into memory work sometimes can be emotional. So I've been doing this for 9 years now. And I think one of the main takeaways that I always remind myself, because I've been on this journey for a long time, is that I'm in control. And so whenever you feel anything triggering, or if you want to stop, you should definitely take the time and pause, and so it's a fun process. It's an emotional process sometimes. And that's to just give you a heads up. So it's really rewarding. And we're going to have a bit of fun just recording a memory together. So today I'm going to start by telling you why I've actually dedicated like the last 9 years of my life, basically, to recording these personal stories. And I'm going to share my slides with you to do that. So I am from Trinidad. And for those of you who don't know, Trinidad is a Caribbean island. It's actually the southernmost Caribbean island in the archipelago. And I left Trinidad when I was around 18 years old to go to university in Canada. And that kind of kickstarted a decade of exploration for me in terms of my career and my identity as a young Caribbean woman. I found myself constantly being asked where I was from, because when you look the way I look and you sound the way I sound and have the story that I have, it's very unusual for a lot of people. And so all that time when I was away, I traveled a lot, and I ended up working in global health with different NGOs and the UN in Ethiopia. And so I'm going to share my screen with you here. Right. So can you see me and can you see my screen?
Yeah, you're good.
Cool. So in 2008 to 2010, I was living in Ethiopia, and I was working on female sexual health issues and development issues like strategic development and aid effectiveness. And one of the things that stood out to me so strongly, we were doing a lot of like root cause analysis, and it was so fascinating to me that how much the culture and the shaped communities and the stories of people was important in understanding that culture. So here we were trying to develop all these kinds of programs, but without understanding those kinds of forces that shaped communities, I found that it was this odd sense of being really unethical, and also being like potentially ineffective. So this was a kind of turning point in my understanding of the importance of life stories and personal stories, because I found myself in all of these embedded in these communities so different to my own, and understanding how important it was for me as a professional to understand their stories and their culture. And yet here I am also unable to really describe my own. I'm this Chinese person. I had people literally fighting me, telling me that there's no way I was from the Caribbean, and I was unable to fully articulate it, and as wrong as that was, it kind of made me step back and think, but what is my story, right? What is the real reason why I think the way I think and my family is where they are right now? And so at that point in time, we also, my co-founder and I, lost somebody who was really close to us. She was 60 at that time, and with her, we lost the ability to ever ask her stories. And by extension, we understood that that meant that we lost the ability to connect with her. And it was a person who is his relative. So it was also a loss of him understanding himself. And so fast forward a few years, I ended up going back to Trinidad, and I became really obsessed with recording my grandmother's story. So this is my grandmother, and she must have been about the same age I was in Ethiopia at this time, except she was in Trinidad. She's from the south of China, and this would have been in a rural area in the south of Trinidad. So I started to record my grandmother's stories every weekend. I would sit down and just ask her all of these questions. And she started to tell me about escaping the Second Sino-Japanese War, which would turn into World War II, about hiding in trenches, eating just like biscuits that were water and flour, how she was a mail order bride. So this man who became my grandfather, she never met before. He was in Trinidad, they communicated by letters, and her mother, because she had been abandoned by her father, decided that she would get married. And she travels all across the world to this tiny little island, not speaking a word of English, gets dropped in this fishing village, and she ends up building this family with this man. And years later, when I was a little baby, they lost everything in a fire. So she had to rebuild our family. And in that same year, she lost him, she lost her mother, and she lost her father. And so in that same year, she started making like little preserves, sweeties, like candies, we call it, like, and in the Caribbean, that would probably be like a few cents US. And she rebuilt our whole family off of that. Right. So when she's recording, telling me all these stories, I started to understand her so much better, but also how empowering it was. And I just felt this need to record these stories to future generations. And that's exactly what I did with a friend of mine who serendipitously was at the University of the West Indies. And this little film that we made totally did not plan for it to be in film festivals, ended up being in film festivals in like Canada and all these places. And so I distinctly remember, like, so I'm in Trinidad, we have this saying called hot foot. It means you can't stand still, right? Like imagine like your feet are always hot. So I've always been like the hot foot child, right? Like in my family, they're like, oh my God, you're always doing something. You're in Ethiopia, you're here, you're there, right? So my grandmother's still like, oh, you're just my crazy grandchild doing this thing. I remember taking her to the cinema that day, and she's like seeing herself on the big screen. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to answer the Q&A because my granny, you know, she still has a Chinese accent. She's never been one for the limelight. And my girl pushes me aside and starts to answer all the questions. And it was like so fabulous. And I still get emotional every time I talk about it because like I stepped back and I saw her for the first time as a woman in her own right and not as my grandmother, you know? And on our way home, because we live in the south of the island and that was in the north, she watched me and she told me that she didn't think that anyone would care, you know, like about who she was. And rightfully so, right? She's a person of color, she's a woman, she's a minority, she's not rich, she's not famous, and she's not a public figure. Like, why? You know, like by all definitions of who gets to be written into history, who gets to tell their story, who has the right to tell their story, she didn't live up to any of those, right? And so that was really transformative for me to understand. And for her, I think especially at that age in her life, she was like 83 at the time, to look back and have a sense of value in what you have built and who you are, no matter how many people tell you that you're not special enough to be in that kind of setting. So my grandmother, this is her. She's like 92 now or whatever. And her story, I didn't realize how much it would have impacted me. Her story has impacted me so much that 9 years later, we've spoken at TEDx. We've been featured in all of these platforms. We've been invited to amazing forums like this to share her story, really, which started and sparked all of this. We've won innovation awards for our work. And most importantly, we've helped hundreds of generations now record their own stories for their own families. So these are some of the really amazing people that we've worked with, you know? And so what we do is that we help people to record their stories and their memories. And we really do this because we believe that it empowers and it can build empathy. And that's for generations. Like, we really aim to look at ourselves and look at the past, the present, and the future with the goal of broadening understanding for each other and building a sense of deep self-awareness so that we can all be better together. And so how we do that is in 3 key ways. So our company is called Plantain, like the banana, for the family of a banana, anybody who knows it from the Caribbean. And actually plantain is from an old Madagascan folktale. And so it's this concept that humans had to decide how to live or die. And we decided that we were given an option to be like the moon that wanes in and out of existence, but lives solitarily, or like a banana tree. And a banana tree, if you know it, it always sprouts, but it dies. And we said, well, what is life without family and community and friends? And plantains, just like myself and my co-founder, and so many of the stories that we tell from all over the world, are migrants. They moved from Asia to Africa, through the, Europe, Latin America, to the Caribbean. And so plantain for us is really an homage to our home and to our elders and to our beginnings. And so what we do is that we help 3 things. We do memories, so we do interviews and we help people to record their memories, to create like narratives so that they can pass these on in a way for future generations. We then do historical research, so there are different degrees of historical research, but we believe, like just like my grandmother's story, that you can really understand a story until you understand the cultural and historical influences of that story. So my grandmother was from what we would call a broken family. You know, Chinese men weren't allowed in the older days as immigrants to take their women that were their wives. It sounds very archaic now, which is the point. It sounds archaic to us, but this is the fact. You know, like this is how it was. And so this led to a lot of fragmented families throughout the Caribbean. And so understanding those things helped me understand myself and help all of us understand each other better. And then design. So this is actually a photograph from one of our books. So we make books that we hope will become heirlooms, something that appeals to future generations, it appeals to you. They have cursing grandmothers in them. They have, like, you know, people who, they're just hilarious. And they're meant to be like that because they're meant to feel like you. You know, they're not meant to be on a bookshelf. It's meant to resonate with you as an individual, right? And if that's because your grandma speaks patois and she cussing up somebody in a market, that's going to be in your book, right? So basically, that's the 3 components to our work. And today, I'm going to talk a little bit with you about, so we're going to get to actually kind of document a little bit of a memory together. And the thing is, like, why memories, right? You know, it's this vast concept, actually, like memory and identity and all of these things are huge. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about the theory that we have behind our work so that it grounds it a little bit, but not in the spirit of the anti-conference conference, not go into too much detail about that stuff. So memories are basically fluid and constructive. That's kind of weird to think of because we think of like a memory, like a moment, right? But actually memories are so different to a direct replication of the past. So it's really different, like a computer memory is literally taking something and replicating it. Our memories actually work differently. We pull information, bits and pieces of information, and we construct something from it. And that's how we remember. And so cognitive neuroscientists have looked into this, and psychologists, and one of the theories is that that is so that we can process what we go through, our life experiences, and that we can learn from them. So we can actually, the flexibility is something that is actually adaptive as humans. And that one of the theories is that it helps us to then simulate future scenarios so that we can prepare ourselves for what to come. So that's a kind of interesting concept, this fact that memory is temporal and memory is flexible. And so there have been these amazing scientists who've worked on this for a very long time, and it's a huge field. So within plantain, the key kind of area of memory that we look at is autobiographical memory. And autobiographical memory is basically when you're kind of combining all these significant experiences and events, and you're weaving them into a coherent story about yourself. So it's like a narrative that you're creating. And it contributes to your identity, it contributes to your well-being, and it's influenced by social and cultural frames. So like what we're talking about with my granny, you know, these sorts of her recollections even to me are influenced by the era that she's recollecting that in, the kind of contextual framework that she thinks is normal, you know, like, or even how a woman recollects versus a man. And so all of those things inform the way that our autobiographical memory is shaped and formed. And so the importance of this to our work in a way is that narrating our personal past, and that's actually creating something that is coherent, can connect us to ourselves, our families, our communities, and our cultures. And so today, what we're going to do is focus on that first part of our work, which is helping people to record a memory. And that's the start of every project, essentially, right? You need to actually kind of sit and document it. And I've struggled for for 9 years, basically, struggled to find a way that is like the easiest way possible, because I've heard too many people who've lost loved ones before actually documenting their memory. A lot of people think they'll get around it and then they don't. Some people, it's really difficult to even have any clue of where to start. And sometimes it's like, it can be daunting, or you think like my grandmother, like, what do I have to say, right? So today I'm here to tell you all that you all have something to say, and that we are going to do a little legacy time capsule, we call it. So I'll break it down. This little time capsule is developed from theories within autobiographical interviews and cultural life stories. So we've used different concepts and our 9 years of experience to break something down in a way that's quite simple. And it's really to just kickstart a conversation to get you to record a memory. So the first thing is we're going to break up into groups. And what we'll do is within those groups, you're going to do a little individual work. So the first thing is, for about 1 minute, we ask you to think about a significant life event to record for future generations. So this can be an event that's your own memory, so something you've experienced yourself, you know, or it can be a memory that's passed on from an elder. But you have to have some knowledge about that because you're going to write about it. So it can be, for example, a migration, you know, you yourself migrating. Like for me, it was a huge turning point to have lived in Ethiopia, and it changed the trajectory of my life, what led up to that. It could be changing a career. It could be the loss of a loved one. And in this picture, which you see in the background for me, this is actually the first year I made mass. So for those of you who don't know about Carnival and mass, Carnival is one of our greatest festivals in the world. And it was bought so this is Juve, which is really a spiritual ritual almost for Carnival. It's the opening and the celebration of our festival, and really the fact that we had a right to celebrate our mass in the way that we wanted to and express ourselves and our Afro-Caribbean ancestors. And so this was the year that I actually got to make mass myself, and the horns that I'm wearing are wire-bended horns, and it was a really transformative experience to me. So this is an example of a memory. this is a pandemic memory. So this year has been insane. So this could be another memory that you document. So this is actually the first time Zake, who's the co-founder of the company, and I went to the supermarket and it was just this crazy surreal experience. This is how we couldn't even believe how uncomfortable these masks were. And then this is like my grandmother. So this is an example of if you want to document elder's story. So this was her marriage in Trinidad. So that's the first thing. So just reflect for like a minute or so and think about, well, what would I want future generations to know, right? Like, and there's no right or wrong, of course, and these answers are yours. They're not going to be shared with the group unless you want to share them with the group. It's a personal exercise. Think of it almost like journaling. And so the second thing we'll do is once you have that memory, for 10 to 12 minutes, I'm going to share with you a little link in the chat, and that's going to take you through a 5-step process. So there are 5 fields that you're going to answer some questions on. The first one is place and time, so tell me where this memory took place. In it, you'll see a few other prompts, like it might say, what's the season, what's the weather, was this a rural place, that sort of thing. So place and time. Then the next one would be people. So who's in this and how are they related to you? Then culture and historical context. Do you know anything about it? So like with my grandmother, it would have been Chinese, Caribbean, Hakka, Trinidadian, that's woman, being a woman. Emotion, so what were you feeling? And then a message to future generations. And so this is a snapshot. You can do it on your phone. So actually that's a snapshot from my phone that shows how the time capsule looks. So you could just pull up your phone and click on it and write in there now, or you could do it on your computer. So once you answer those questions, so this is all in the group still, we'll ask each group to talk about 2 things. How did it feel kind of reflecting on this and recording it? And then to discuss one element of those 5 that we just spoke about. So does anyone have questions about that? If not, I'm going to share this.
There was a question in the chat, Felicia. Someone asked, what if our past is not coherent, paradoxical, or contradictory? Just thinking about how to embrace those complexities as we share our stories.
Yeah, I think it's a very real question, especially for people from Black, Brown, Indigenous communities like ourselves. I think the first step is about sitting down and recording that, in whatever format, frame, situation it is currently in. Because until we do that, we can't think about it and better understand it. There are some realities that we have to face sometimes, and I tell a lot of people this, especially people who are interested in ancestral research from communities like ours, that sometimes you're going to have to accept that you don't have all the answers and that you won't be able to find all the answers because of whether it's atrocities like slavery, indenture, racism. There are certain things that have erased certain elements of our history. And that stands for everyone, but it stands sometimes, in my experience, I've come across it a lot with communities from our region. And so what I tell people is that if we don't actually face and record these things, imagine how much less and how much more confusing 20 generations down from us it will be. And so I always encourage people to take your time, first of all, because it's sometimes emotional, but to record it, because I think that we would be doing our generations, past, present, and future, a disservice if we don't at least try to record it, because you don't know how it can be of service in the future. So that's my take on that like we need to embrace and record these things. It can be paradoxical and it can be contradictory, sometimes also incoherent. But they do need to be embraced. There's this concept in memory work about pain being passed down through generations. And I think about this line about, well, this is my thought, you know, how doing the work that we do. Well, if pain can be passed on for generations, then why can't joy? And so I think, yes, that's how I feel about it. So shall we start doing a little journaling together? How many people are there?
There's 25 participants in the room. So far,
Okay.
I can create the breakout rooms, but would you mind sharing any links from now so that folks can open it up if we need to, or will that be shared in the breakout room?
No, I just shared it.
Perfect. Okay.
How many folks do you want in the breakout room since we're about 24 now?
Equal 4 or so, 4 plus the odds, because we'll be moving around, right? I'll be moving around. Onisha and Shireen, I don't know if you're moving around or you're staying in a group. If you're staying in a group, then closer to 5. If not, then minus us, so like 4 per groupish.
4 per group. Okay.
Yeah.
You can move around. What do you think, O?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. So I'll create maybe, I think it's only letting, okay, maybe like numbers are going down. So maybe four rooms to be safe. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Wait, do you mean 5 rooms, but just fewer people?
Yes.
Because I think we need the 5 groups.
Okay, so 5 rooms then?
5 rooms, yeah, 5 rooms.
Okay. So I'm gonna click the link now. So make sure you open the link because I don't know if you'll have access to this chat in the breakout room so that it's open for you. I'm going to hit create breakout rooms and it'll pop up on your window and you can click join.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much. I've popped around in some groups and I heard some of you sharing, and I think that's really amazing. One of the concepts behind memory is social connection, and how actually it can build so much social connection within our communities. So I think it's so nice to hear you all being open, whether it's about the process, certain elements about your memory, or the actual content about it. So I want to like say thank you all for that. So one of the things that we had asked is if you could share in each group how you felt going through this process. And also each group was given one component of that time capsule per se to record. Well, not to record, sorry, to think about a little bit more, like how that could influence your memory. So I'll ask each group to present for like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes or so. And please feel free to share your own memories if you want. So we'll start with group 1. And I was really terrible with documenting the group numbers. So I don't know. We don't have to go in any order. Anybody feel free to start.
And I think so room 1 had Carmen Cruz, India Hayes, A. Huggins. So anyone in that room, if you want to share.
I mean, I will. Does anybody else in the group? I mean, I can go. I mean, okay. I think trying to draw in all the discussions and all the beautiful memories and very touching memories that were shared. I think for all of us, place sort of made time feel like it was endless, right? It seemed like one long stretch of, if we revisit a place, right, then we immediately remember that memory, right? And even if that memory was tied to something difficult or shifting or in transition, it was the place that sort of helped ground us, right? If I'm remembering everyone correctly. I mean, I'll speak for myself. So some of us talked about, how important place connected in our own work, but I think beyond the work that we do, right, how it connects to our personal life. So place grounds us, right? But at the same time, place can shift, but place also holds, right? And it holds our futures, it holds our past, it holds our presence without necessarily like keeping us there. It's not stagnant, right? It often feels fluid sometimes. So even if we do recall a memory in that place, even if we're not there, the sort of feeling that arises, it feels like, we're there again, right? It feels like all that emotion is here again with us, even if we're not in that specific location. Yes.
Mm.
If
So
anyone
do
else
you,
wants to add anything.
yeah. And so how did you all think of like define place? Was it like geographical, ecological, because your concept of place is really interesting to me to hear about, because it is almost fluid, right? Like the way that you're talking, but like place can almost sound like a concept versus an actual physical space, right? So how did you all tell me a little bit more about how you defined that? Mhm. Like, was it actually geographical? Like,
Yeah, I
It,
think for most of, oh, go ahead, you go.
yeah. Yeah, it seemed like a lot like in relationship, right? Like the place was came through the relationships with the people in our stories, in our
right.
memories.
Yeah. Yeah, I think place is a really interesting concept. And like what you said also about place can shift, but it can also hold, and it can like connect us so much. I think a lot about this concept of home, right? Like we always hear this concept of like, where is home? And what does that actually mean? And so what you just said really resonated with me on that level. And in terms of space, like place, a lot of research has been done, not enough for places that are, like the global south, but the way that a place can actually inform memory, right? So for example, this is a really interesting thing that I'd never actually thought about until Zake, my co-founder, who's East African, came to live in Trinidad. And he was like, yo, you guys describe blue in so many ways, right? Like, so because in East Africa, it's actually really green, like they're not by the ocean. But in the Caribbean, we have all of these concepts of blue, right? And so that embeds in your memory in such a different way too. So like when an aquamarine, like what does that trigger for you? And that actually is tied to the ecology of your space, but also the language of your place, right? The language, like, because in East Africa, maybe you didn't have to have that many concepts of what blue is. And in other communities, it's similar. Like we have different ways of describing categories. And so place can be this kind of interesting fluid concept, and it does definitely change over time. We live in a world right now that will probably look really different to our great grandkids. I mean, we just celebrated Earth Day, but how are the actual ecological landscapes changing, right? And what did our ancestors actually see, and how, when they're recounting it, are we actually thinking about what it was like there where they were situated, right? And that kind of links also to this concept of time. So there's Professor Wang, who studies cultural theory and memory. She looks at the way cultures help us to encode memory, to retrieve memory, what we help to actually pass on memory, And so one of the things is, how do we even think of time as individuals and cultures? Some people would say that the Western culture is much more linear in our perspective. You know, like we are like, you're born, you're going forward, like it's very like month, day, year, like this. Whereas in other cultures, it's much more cyclical. You know, so there's this concept of time being like you are here and you're learning from ancestors, you're going forward, we're all connected in this kind of revolution, like a cycle versus linear. And so that also makes you perceive your memories differently. And so those two concepts of time and place, you use the word grounding, like they're like almost the most fundamental, like first grounding of this event that you have, right? Like, and so in our interviews, it's almost inevitably the first kind of questions that we ask, like, can you situate this for us? Because it tells you so much immediately, right? Anybody else from that group have any thoughts, like about the process itself and or the concept of time and place? So let's go on to whoever is group 2. Manisha, can you help?
Yeah, so this room had Andy, Hanako, SD, Whitaker. So anyone in that room, if you want to speak.
Hi, sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. So Steve here, and I think for us, what was a common thread, there's a bit of range, but a common thread was this idea of, with regard to people, the process having a nostalgic aspect to it, just looking back and just carving out this interval of time that either we want to, in my case, return to, but we can't because we were very young and the people who were involved, for me, were very instrumental in my upbringing, my culture and my education, family and friends in particular, and then maybe not having that experience and access so much anymore because persons have passed on, etc. And, you know, again, you can't rediscover these people or these things in particular without a time machine, which we don't have. Other aspects of it, you know, we were brief, but it bore weight, the idea of just really just taking us back to these people and these spaces. Interestingly enough, and, you know, one person who can speak more to this if they so choose, it was in absence of people that the memory that they shared had its most weight, because then they had a transformative aspect of it, a range of emotion that went from feeling a particular way in a specific space in the absence of people, and then looking back on it now, having that memory reframed as a jumping off point, a transition, a transformation into something else. So that person had a becoming, so to speak, in the absence of other individuals being present in that particular memory. And so common thread, but also a lot of distinction for it with regard to the process and people as an element within that process. But nostalgia and just this embeddedness, this just immersion was a big part of the little details that we shared so bravely but cautiously, being strangers. If anyone else has anything from our group to add to that, I know we had some audio issues, some of us, please do. I can't pretend that I got everything right, but I really enjoyed sharing the details with you, and the process was amazing. Plantain, like the process, yeah, this is one of the best things I've done in days and weeks, so thank you for that.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you all so much for being like so open to this process. Would anyone else from that group like to share? So I think those two concepts, I mean, kind of blew my mind in a way, thinking about the absence of people and how important the absence of people are. I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about the pandemic, right? And like how absent people have been during this pandemic, like, you know, and how that has shaped us. Like, I know, Shireen, your work or your thesis your dissertation was on festivals, right? Like, you know, on that immersion in this, like what these dynamics mean. And so, yeah, the absence of people, I think a lot of us can understand that even more now than a year and a half or however long this crazy ass pandemic has been going on for now, you know, like, and so what that means to a memory and how that transforms, like you use the word transformative, like that's really fascinating to me. Thank you so much for sharing that. And this concept of nostalgia, like nostalgia is, I'm curious to hear from you, like drop it in the chat, like like what do you think of nostalgia? Is nostalgia a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? Like I think there are different different thought processes on that, you know. Some people are like, oh, nostalgia is just living in the past, you know, like who cares about that? Right now we can see a trend in nostalgia if you look at like social media and stuff. Like my little brother who's 13, he's obsessed with CD, like cassette tapes, right? You know, like there's this kind of, he was telling me, because he's so woke, like that there are all these like cell phones that now look like old school flip phones that are huge, but you're embedding your smartphone in it, right? Like, and then like the fashion and the style. So what are your thoughts? Like, is nostalgia a positive thing? Is it a negative thing, or neither? You know, like how does it kind of influence us in our daily life? So one of the points that I wanted to bring up in this conversation about people is like, so the questions that we asked in that kind of section was, who are these people? How old are they? And what relationship do they have to you? And I think there are two, aside from the fact that these were like people who played pivotal moments before, during, and after, like I could think of so many of my memories like that. It's so important, I think, to also place yourself in where they were at that time and where you were at that time in your memory. And by that, I mean, like, where were you in your mental development stage? You know, like Eric Erickson talks about the 8 stages of identity and personality development. So sometimes when we're doing our interviews, which are semi-structured, I'll look at the fact that this era in somebody's life was when they were trying to figure out whether, like in 65 plus years old, you're trying to look back and see your life as valuable, right? As an adolescent, you're trying to figure out your identity. And these are concepts that you are at that developmental stage dealing with. So when I look at my grandmother going on that journey she took as a 20-year-old, like, I think it's helpful for me sometimes to also think, like, what was she actually kind of going through at that moment from a like developmental perspective, aside from all the facts of what was happening. And also, if it was me, what was I going through, and to be understanding of myself. And another interesting aspect is that you are now reflecting on this memory from your own position as an outsider. And so what does that perspective lend to all these interactions, right? And the dynamic between people, whether it's your elders, were you allowed to have a voice or not? You know, and I think people plays into all of that, which is, can be very interesting. So I'm just gonna look to see if the chat, anybody's, oh, it seems to be. Were there any comments? Can you see?
Yeah, someone mentioned, Aisha mentioned her definition of nostalgia as, I think it's a meaning we attach to the story we tell ourselves about a memory.
Very cool. Anyone else? And the other groups, please feel free to weigh in, you know, like it's a conversation, like about like what it would have felt like for you. So don't feel like you have to stick to a group if you have a thought on something. So
well, I actually have to run. I'm from group 3.
Okay.
My name is Aisha, and I was the designated reporter outer. So before I go, I just want to, I think our group was pretty focused on the writing part of it. We spent a lot of our time writing, but we did think together a little bit about how good it felt just to be in community with other people who think intentionally about memory, who think consciously about memory making and what it means for our lives. And Amy spoke really eloquently about how memory is sometimes dependent. And what we make of memory is sometimes dependent on our interaction with an audience, right? And like that, we have our own meaning that we assign to the art that we make as an expression of a memory, but then the audience can sometimes shape the way that we even feel about what we've made of a memory by having their own reactions to that art and their own interpretations of what it means. And so we bonded over that. It felt really good to be in this community. And we all are kind of like, how did they know? How did you guys know that we're all thinking about this in this way? So thank you so much for curating this space.
Oh, that's so great to hear. That's incredibly, like, yeah, performance is a huge part of memory, right? Like narrative, like if we actually talk about narrative. So before you leave, I just want to let you know that your time capsule, like your actual story that you wrote, is in your email. So because you won't be here at the end, so you can check your email and see it. And you can always redo your time capsule at any time. So maybe we can send a note out after so that you can go back to your link if you want. Yeah. So bye, Aisha. Thanks so much for sharing. Thank you. Yeah, performance. I mean, we talked a lot about the academics in this space, right? The psychologists and the neurocognitive, all these people. But art is huge. I mean, artists have been doing this forever, right? Like we take so much inspiration from art. And if you actually look at one of our Plantain pages that talks about the bespoke process, because we have one of our products is a bespoke book. It starts off by saying that storytelling is a bit of a mix, life storytelling is a bit of a mix of art and science, right? And so absolutely, like I think it changes. And I was really wondering about this concept too with my grandmother, right? Like, so her being on that stage, right? Like being seen in that way, how much did that actually influence her, how she felt too about her memory, and also how much an interviewer interacts with your memory. Sorry, I'm seeing a time check. Is that 5 minutes for the whole talk?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So can we go through emotion and future generations quickly?
So that would be room 4 with Beverly Powerful. Folks in that room, and timekeeping 1.
Yes, thank you. Beverly, you can chip in if you want. So I can start by saying that everything that everyone else said really resonated with ours. And what we talked about was really memories of migration. So migration from Jamaica to the US. And in my case, migration because I survived the genocide. And so we really, we took time to think about, the level of the vast array of emotion that we went through, from sadness, from anger, but also the levels, the different levels of cultural shocks that comes from being moved to one place to the other. And the way we had to contrasting perspectives. On the one hand, there was a sense that for the wonderful Beverly, negative emotions in a way, sometimes when a memory is painful, your memory can block it. And so for her, positive emotion remained, and in a way they give her that sense of healing, that sense of renewal. And for me, it was the reverse. So because of my life journey, actually my memory of my brain wiped the positive memories, because I had to keep that sense of, is this place safe? Because the way I react with place for me is not something that is safe, because I get ejected all the time. I also lived in refugee camps, and I'm in the UK, which is my 6th country. So there's no sense of safety in the place. And so, and it actually took me a decade to retrieve the positive memories, but that retook actually decolonizing my time of space and place and time to go back to the way that my ancestors think about that. And so we were thinking about really the importance of being intentional in cultivating, but also keeping attachment to positive emotion and also transferring that to the future generation. Like in my culture, all of us who are in the room, we are already elders. So elders is not an age sensitive thing, because we are elders because the end of our life is to become a good ancestor. And so being a good ancestor means that we are working, moving towards being an ancestor to someone else. And so then how can we be intentional in really passing down those, joy and joyful memories? Because I think it was the wonderful Shireen who was talking about intergenerational joy. And so how do you do that? More in a summary.
Wow, that's so profound. Thank you so much for sharing that emotion with us, and also your perspectives on that. I think that you hit on so many points, like that concept of we're all ancestors, we're all becoming ancestors, what kind of ancestor am I becoming right now, and creating those safe spaces for ourselves and others. So thank you for sharing that with us. Does anybody else have any comments? And I'm going to show you actually something that in the last slide that makes me think so much about what you said. So, and I think that leads really amazingly into the last one, which is future generations, this kind of purposefulness that we have, that we just kind of sat through together, that gives you a sense of empowerment and control in some way, right? It took years for to come to the idea that how and when we can deal with certain things in our life, right? This concept of, can space ever be safe for me because of the way that my story is and what I've inherited? And what are we hoping that future generations can learn from us? Because we have so much to teach each other. And that's not always an easy process for many of us from our communities. So does that last group have anything that they'd like to share about future generations? And then we can...
I'll go fast in the interest of time. Hi from group 5, my name is Rochelle, and I shared about a story from actually a friend of mine, whose grandfather was had very traumatic events in his childhood and became an orphan, and his way of dealing with the trauma was not to share at all. And so she now, as a granddaughter, is just finding out a lot about her family history through documents and about their wealth and things that they just didn't know was happening. And because of his choice of blocking that out, they didn't get the opportunity. So I guess the conclusion was that future generations, it's screened through the experience of each person and how they handle whatever happened to them. And that story gave me insight on how I will choose to share good and bad. Granted, we're not playing trauma wars or anything like that, but being through those type of situations is way different than the kind of privilege that I've had to experience in my life. But I'm hoping that for future generations that I will get the opportunity to share the good and bad and the things that have framed me, because I think both parts are important to any story. Okay.
They absolutely are. And one of the things that I talk about that I've learned so much is that you really have no idea how and who in your future generation is going to use or learn from your experiences. And so your stories basically, to close, are a database. They're our personal database, and so 4 generations down, 5 generations down, you don't know how different kids within that generation will lean on your memory, whether it's empower, to heal, to grow, just to understand, to understand, well, why, like my family is filled with fragments and it's really painful sometimes. And it took me a long time to address some of that. But like delving into that has also helped me understand the people who have created those fragments in my family and my family's own role to play in that. And so I think, like, I really encourage people too, that you often have no clue as yet that there's going to be a crazy grandchild like Felicia down the line who's going to take all of this and use it somehow. Like, that young artist in your family, like my brother, all the work that we've done on our stories, he uses that in his own way to help him, and that came years after the way that I processed it. But if we lose that, like your friend, like who can maybe never answer those questions, like it's that sense of, allow the future to also learn, in their own time, in their own space, the same way sometimes we may have wanted to. And so that's really like the close of it all for us. And thank you so much. I want to like end on saying how empowering being in a community with people who think about others and think about ourselves, the past, the present, and the future, how our memories can impact ourselves and others around us. And if you go to your email, you would have all received a little one-sheeter like this, and it's automatically filled with your memories. You'll see 2 pages. So we have tried to empower everyone in the world with a printer or access to one. And even if you don't have one, then you can have your own book of a memory. And so you can go back into that same link that I shared with you. It's free for everyone in the world. You can share it with anybody. You can also, what I find great about it is asking your friends or your loved ones those questions. Like we did a 2020 time capsule to help people think through and reflect on what happened last year. And the questions like that your friends answer are just so emotional also. It's such a bonding experience. And of course, these little time capsules are just to actually get us to sit in like 10 minutes and record something that's meaningful. But we also have a free interview guide if you want to actually start, doing it in more depth. It gives guidelines on resources that you could look into. It gives tips that we've learned over 9 years. It gives you a heads up about things that are difficult that you might face, like resistance, in recording stories. And so I will share those links with you in the chat, and feel free to go and check out your memories. So I'm going to stop sharing so that you could actually see mine. Can you see me now?
Yeah, we can see you.
So these are like the little memory books that you get. And of course, the digital ones are yours to keep forever. I'm really curious of like, so I tuck these away in like my safe spot that I'll never forget things, which I always forget. So I'm really curious, like in 25 years, when I open up my safe space, what I would have thought about this little memory that I documented and how I would have changed. And so it's a little book. It's like origami. We live in such a Zoom world now, like it's so great to actually touch something. So I do encourage you that if you do have access, to just play with it and have fun, and do as many as you want, share them with whoever. And you would have seen it in your email. This is my 2020. So this is also available on our website. So I'm going to share that in the link in the chat. And then, does anyone have questions? I think we're done.
Someone asked for a copy of the guide because they joined late, if that's possible. But as you can see in the chat, thank you so much, Felicia. This has been such a soul-filling space. I don't know another adjective to describe it besides that. And I appreciate just the community care that you created in this work. Memory work is powerful, but also can be hard. And so you effortlessly took us through that, and I appreciate that. And is there anything else you wanted to mention before I close this off?
Well, I almost just cried when you said that. So thank you all so much. It is definitely work that we believe in so much, and that we want all of you all to feel like you have the means, you can do this, and to spread it, because we all can, you know. And I just want to thank you all for sharing so much and for being just, you know, amazing. And please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I've shared, I don't know why I can't get the time capsule, the do-it-yourself interview guide is on our website. I can also send it to you, to Shireen and Anisha.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Right.
So thank you all for joining us. If you're interested in the next session, it's a movement offering with Matt Garza. I've put the link in the chat. It's also in the handbook. But I'll close out this session. Thank you again, Felicia. And I hope you all continue to join us in some of the future sessions. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.